Hello and welcome again to another episode of One Starfish, where our mission is to change the world one starfish or one person at a time. As always, guys, make sure to rate, review, subscribe, all of the wonderful things. Get the word out. I'm really excited for our guest today. Tim's a really good friend of mine. We've been friends in the RTA and out of the RTA. We have similar tastes in running to Mexico when it's cold out, located in Colorado. Tim is an engineer, runs an engineering firm. We're going to get into that story. It started and then it was kind of like there's some hiccups and we'll get back into that. So anyway, welcome to the show, Tim.
Thank you, Angela. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, let's get into, we were talking before, let's go back to like childhood. What caused you to be, get into the engineering world in the first place? How are you kind of raised and how did that influence maybe where you're at now?
Wow, that's an interesting question. So I was actually given up for adoption at birth, and I was raised by a couple of nice folks that are deceased now, and fairly dysfunctional home. Dad was a full-blown alcoholic, and mom was just trying to do what she had to do to kind of tolerate the whole situation in hindsight. But I was always one to kind of tear things apart. Pretty typical of engineers, I think. Tearing apart lawnmowers, motorcycles, hair dryers, you name it. Getting in trouble for it because I couldn't always get that stuff back together. And then reading as a kid, my mom would buy us those pop-up books with the things that pop up in the middle of the pages. And I was always fascinated by how those things popped up so well and folded back down. And then a lot of like Reader's Digest had a series of like fix-it books, like how to fix XYZ. And I used to read those.
Wow.
But yeah, probably a strange kid.
Well, I definitely was not reading those things. The pop-up books, I don't think I ever was like, oh, look at that. I was just like, that's cool. So
Yeah.
that's really neat. So, you grew up, did you have siblings or just you and your folks?
Yeah, I had one sister who was 2 years younger than me, and she was adopted too. My parents couldn't have kids. They were married for, I think, 15 years, and my mom underwent some surgeries to try to get pregnant, and she was unable back then in the 70s, 60s. And so then they opted for adoption, and I was first, and then my younger sister was second a couple years later.
Wow. And, as you went through that, your dad being an alcoholic and all of that kind of stuff, do you remember some of the ways that you coped with that as a child? And ways that maybe your mom coped as you look back, like you said, she was kind of coping. What were some of the things that you remember dealing with that trauma, I guess you could say, in the family?
Wow. The way my mom coped, she tended to escape the situation. Like she would come home from work, and essentially make us some kind of dinner, and then go to sleep. She'd say, I'm going to take a nap. And she would just nap pretty much until my dad went to bed. And then she would get up and stay up late and watch Johnny Carson and all that, until the wee hours of the morning. But they would argue all the time. It was constant yelling and screaming. And, I was just a little guy trying to figure it all out and stick up for my mom. So it was pretty horrible. The way I coped, I was angry all the time as a kid. Just because of our situation at home and probably to some degree, to be honest. And I don't, if my mom hears this, I'm not saying this to upset her, but being raised by people who you don't know, and you don't like we didn't have core values back then, but our core values were definitely not aligned. Yeah, I always knew from a very early age, I'm like, I don't belong here and I got to get the hell out of here. Like I knew that from about age 4 on. And yeah, I remember telling both my parents, like, you're not my parents. And I wasn't doing it to be mean or to hurt them, but I just knew. I'm like, you guys, I don't belong here. I really do need to get the hell out of here. And I did move out when I was 16. So, yeah, but my way of coping was just getting angry and staying outside. Thank God we lived in California, so I could be outside a lot. I spent very little time in the house. just figuring
Interesting.
stuff out.
Interesting. And what about your
Yeah.
sister? Did she feel the same way or was it totally different? Just curious.
Well, that's interesting too. She and I are really good friends. She lives in California. She's a nurse or a pharmacy tech in an emergency room. We've talked a lot about this topic,
Hmm.
and our recollections are
Totally
different.
different. Yeah,
Yeah, which is very interesting. And here's the
it
weirdest
is.
part is I don't really remember her that much. Like she was there. She was 2 years younger than me. And I mean, I remember her being there, but I don't like for living with somebody an entire childhood, you should remember a lot more than I do.
Hmm.
And it's almost like it's been just
Blanked.
expunged.
So interesting.
It's really bizarre. And we've
Huh.
talked about that very honestly. And um, I've apologized. I said, I just don't remember you being there a lot. I was just in my own little
You were
survival
just in
world,
your
I
own
guess.
little world. Yeah.
To
You
some
did as a
degree,
kid.
I think so.
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
weren't and a lot of kids I think are like that. And it's so interesting. Like, two kids come out of the same situation and sometimes they come out and both were adopted. So, it still come out of the same situation and completely different stories um that they tell themselves. So I think sometimes like as an adult, as you're listening to this, and if you've been telling yourself stories as to, hey, I'm the reason I am is because of my childhood, because a lot of people blame their childhood for their adulthood, which you cannot blame. It is your childhood and it is your adulthood and you make decisions. But maybe your image of your childhood was totally off. Maybe it wasn't even what it really was. It was your like interpretation and your perception as a child that maybe wasn't reality. So I just, that's something I got out of that is who knows what your
Yeah.
actual
Who
childhood
knows?
was. Like that was your
Well,
perception. And it caused you to obviously, like you said, leave home at 16. So you left home at 16 and then kind of where did you go from there?
yeah. So I skipped a grade. I started school a little bit early. I was born in August, so I was always the youngest in the class for the most part. And then I had an opportunity to skip a grade. I was in what's called a combination class. There were fifth and sixth graders, and I was in fifth grade doing all sixth grade work. So then I skipped a grade. So the combination of those two things caused me to graduate when I was 16. So I was done with school when I was 16. I had already had some businesses. And at that point, I had a washing machine and dryer repair business, which I still have the business card for. I have one business card that my sister
Wow.
found and gave to me.
To laminate it.
It's framed in my office.
Oh, there you go. Perfect.
Um, but it was called MACT because my name's Tim McCarthy. So MACT, MACT, washing machine and dryer repair, I think. And we would go to these bizarre places in California in the desert and buy a truckload full of washing machines and dryers and used ones for like $7 a piece and fix them and then
Wow.
bring them out to swap meets and sell them used. Um, Very unprofitable business and a lot of work. And then like a single mom would come up, with three kids and ask me how much the washing machine was, and I'm just like, oh, I'll just come install it for free. Don't worry about it. And I would just give stuff away, stuff I couldn't afford to give away. I was just giving away. So
Hmm.
yeah, not a great businessman back then. And then
Interesting.
yeah, so that was right after high school. I was 16, moved away, and then ended up coming back and taking a couple stabs at community college and failing out. So ended up joining the Navy. Just to that's a whole nother
It's what
story.
a lot of Americans do, it seems like. That's the thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
They're good
yeah,
recruiters.
I went to the recruiter. This is a funny story, and this is 100% true. I went to the recruiter. I was just exhausted. I was like, man, my business is horrible. I was living with a couple of girls. It was just all, I was doing drugs. It was just a bad scene. And I went to the recruiter, and they had to ask you some questions back then. And he said, "Have you ever slept with another man?" And I said, "No." He's like, "Okay, that's good." He said, "Have you ever done drugs?" And I said, yeah, yeah." He's like, "When's the last time you did drugs?" I said, "Last night. I haven't been to sleep. I was on the beach all night." And he said, "I'll tell you what, Tim. he said, let's do both of ourselves a favor. Uh, why don't you pretend like this meeting never happened and go away, don't do drugs for 30 days and then come back and we'll start this conversation over. So that's what I did. And I joined the Navy and spent 6 years serving in the U.S. Navy.
Wow, that's crazy. So, what got you the entrepreneur? Was your dad an entrepreneur? Was your mom
No.
like maybe it was your
Mm.
actual biological in there somewhere?
And that's what's weird is, and before I forget to say this, like finding my biologic mom when I was 19, and I've got two half
Oh, you
sisters and
did. Okay.
huge family. It kind of saved my life. I really believe that. Like to not know where you come from is kind of disorienting. Uh, it's
Mm.
it's it's a major problem. At least it was for me. Um, but what was the question?
Yeah, the entrepreneur side, where did that came from?
Oh, yeah, totally 100% not from my adopted parents, from my biologic family. When I found them when I was 19, my mom was running a like a nail salon, hair salon, beauty salon with like 12 dozen girls that all worked for her, booth rent type of situation. And then my grandfather, total entrepreneur, he's a farmer, kept his own books and all that kind of stuff, brought his product to market. And then, yeah, just story and story and story of entrepreneurs in my bloodline. Um, Pretty much everybody in my biologic family is of some form of an entrepreneur.
Okay. So that's
Um,
where that came from.
yeah, I think so.
Interesting. And then you joined the Navy, and then from the Navy, you you shipped up and shaped out, I guess, and came back, and then became an engineer and got into running a firm, starting your firm kind of thing, or how did all that like fit in?
Yeah, so in the Navy was very beneficial for me. I still keep in touch with a lot of those guys that were my friends. We went to two wars together, two Persian Gulf tours. And I was trained on how to run nuclear power plants. So I had great training in the Navy. I learned how to learn. I learned a lot. We worked really hard. Um, so I was in the engineering department in the Navy. And then when I got out, it was just a natural transition to start going to community college again. I tested
Third
into
time's the charm.
algebra. I tested into algebra one. We took an assessment test, just algebra one. So uh, started actually in algebra two. I went and asked the teacher. I was like, "Can I start in algebra two?" He said, "Hey, you're 25 years old. You're paying for this. You can do whatever you want to do. I don't care." And so started in algebra two and just worked my way through the whole engineering curriculum eventually and graduate. I was 30 when I finally graduated. So long road. Then as far as starting a business, I'd always kind of had businesses.
Hmm.
Those typical entrepreneur stories where you're newspaper routes and selling fruit and just doing all kinds of weird stuff. Always did that. I had people working for me on the playground in third grade for real, selling telephone wire. That's all. um,
Child
but
labor with the child running
when
it. I don't know how this
when
works.
when the economy when the big recession hit in 2008, 9, and 10, in 2010, I quit my job and I just went out on my own because I knew everybody was getting laid off anyway. And I told my wife at the time, I said, if we're going to go down, I'd like to go down on my own and not because my boss made some bad decisions or something like that. So she wasn't a super fan, but it worked really well.
Okay, and then we started, and then I know, you were married, you had three boys. Things went south there, and you said that was like where you basically lost everything. So you built something that was obviously relatively successful, whatever that means. And
Yeah.
then, personal life kind of happened and you lost. So tell us a little bit about like going through that dark time and how did you get out of it?
Yeah. Super dark time. It's even hard to talk about. We were married for 16 years and a lot of relationships don't work out. We really believed in marriage. Like we'd never talked about divorce. It just kind of it just happened over time. I think we both wish it wouldn't have, but it did, and just I don't know how to explain it, but it was unfortunate. It's hard to talk about these things without sounding like I'm saying something bad about somebody, but we each kind of chose our method of getting through the divorce and on the other side of it. And she chose a very aggressive attorney. And I'm not one to fight. Like, I'm just like, all right, whatever, it'll all work out for me somehow in the end. In hindsight, maybe that wasn't the best strategy.
It's kind of like the giving away the washers and stuff.
I gave away way too much. Um, it did it without getting into all the details. And if anybody listens to this or sees this and they're struggling or they're suicidal because of a divorce and it seems hopeless, like, feel free to get a hold of me somehow. And I'll be there for you because I almost didn't make it. I'm not saying that to sound dramatic. I almost didn't make it, like, alive through it. And it was very difficult on me and my kids and uh, my company. I ended up having to sell my company, which was doing almost $4 million a year at that point. And I basically had to do a liquidation sale. I sold it very inexpensively just because I was not functional. I couldn't run a 20-person team and go through the divorce. So, but I think I would handle things a lot differently today. I'm
Sure.
different.
Sure.
And, after, the different things you and I have been exposed to with Ed and Andy and friends, and it would go down a lot differently today. I would hope, at least.
So let's go into that if you don't mind a little bit, like, because I want to understand it. One thing that I love about podcasts is digging into people's brain and like what makes them tick. And so that, through that, hopefully other people can like figure out
Sure.
things. So, she's taking to the cleaners. Obviously there's some heartbreak involved because like you planned on being forever, 16 years, kids involved. You mentioned suicide thoughts, and I know you as a very strong person. So this is why I'm digging into this. So, if someone's listening to you now and they knew you now, they'd be like, no way. Like, I think that, no way. So, but like you were in that, and that's very vulnerable to share that. When you're feeling like you were to the point of like, how does that work? Like, what is worth losing the life over? Like, where does that mind go? So if someone's listening to this and they have someone in their life, this is more how I'm wanting, that's in that situation, how can they help them? Like, where's the mind so that you can start to help someone out of that so they don't do something that, you can't ever take back?
I think it's, for me at least, it was just a function of pain. I think that's pretty common when you're going through something like that, or, there's all different kinds of versions of that. You get to a point where you're just like literally physically, mentally, emotionally, just completely exhausted, like beyond exhausted. And you just want it to end, and you can't even imagine a way that it could end other than just you checking out. Yeah, you checking out. I think that's a pretty fair assessment. At least it is for my situation. I was just like, I just want this to end. Like, this is horrible. I never even imagined this could happen, let alone happen to me. I'm a pretty decent guy. Like, I don't go out of my way to do evil stuff to people.
No,
And so I'm like, wow, what did I do to deserve all this, and that, I don't want to say the answer is nothing. Obviously, I was married and I was part of the problem. But I think the whatever you want to call it, the consequences were not proportionate to the whatever wrong I did in life.
Which a lot of times
Cumulative.
it's not. Like, I think of parents that have
Yeah.
lost kids and dealt like
Hmm.
it's not like they deserved it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it just
Yeah.
is. So what got you out of that? What prevented you from taking your own life?
My kids, 100%. They were there for me the whole time. And we talked about a lot of things, probably more than I should have. And we've talked about, I mean, this is 10 years ago, but it went on for a long time.
Yeah, so they were
And
relatively young then. Your youngest would have been 17, 10 years ago.
yeah, yeah. And so me and my sons are really close, and we would talk about things, and maybe we talked too much about things. I'm not sure. Um, I don't know. It's hard to know the right way to handle it, but what I've told them since is, hey, maybe I overshared at the time, but you need to know that it was helpful to me, and I'm still here because you guys were there for me, and I wasn't trying to put it all on you or share too much. I was just doing whatever I had to do to survive. Is the truth. And I think the most helpful thing somebody can do for somebody and whose mind is in a situation like that, which is really unimaginable to me even right now sitting here, but it was very real, is just really try to be a friend to them. Just because when the hardest thing to do is just endure time when your mind is in that position or that place. You don't know what to do with yourself. Like I watched every movie. I'd go to the movie theaters and just watch movies because I didn't know, I was a dad in a house with a wife and a dog and all those things, and I didn't have any of those things like overnight. And I didn't know what to do with myself. I honestly didn't know what to do with myself. So I started hiking and drinking and doing all kinds of good and bad things. Um, Ultimately, for me, my kids, friends, and then I just got a wild hair. And well, a friend invited me to Uganda on a missions trip. I went to Uganda. That helped a lot. That was only a few weeks, and I came back and I thought I need to do more things to help people, and
Uh,
and also, quite honestly, I this is part of the reality of the situation. If I couldn't have made those monthly payments, which were huge, it's a court order. I could have gone to jail. So I started traveling to Mexico City, just looking for a way. Like if I can't make these payments for 8 years every month, I could potentially go to jail. How do I escape the country? Because I'm not going to jail because I didn't do anything wrong. So, so I started traveling to Mexico City and I fell in love with it. And I ended up, as you know, I've lived there a lot over the past 5 years. I've had two different apartments and I'm looking for another apartment right now.
that's so
So,
cool. So one of the things that I got out of that, all of that, if you're listening to this, I mean, obviously you got different things, is be of service to others. A big thing was obviously the kids, but some people don't have kids. So if you don't have kids, you have nieces and nephews, you have people that, or maybe your kids are against you, which I know that happens, and that's really hard.
yeah,
I know some moms
yeah,
going through that right now. And you know, but pouring into others, like going to Uganda, not that you have to go to Uganda or go somewhere, but like there's people that need your help. And so I think that that's a huge one is when you can get out of your head and help others, you start to see that maybe your life isn't as bad as you think it is. For most people listening to this, if you're listening to a podcast, your life probably isn't as bad as a lot of people's are. Some people don't even have anything to listen to this. So, like be of service to others and help people maybe be of service to others. Like the friend that invited you, that was awesome move on his part. That was able to help you to go and to be there. So then
yep.
you came back and now you're not in jail. You don't have to run away. That's awesome. And we're starting to rebuild. You started to rebuild a company and which is really cool. And tell us kind of where you're at now, Tim, and what do you see as a vision for, I know you have other companies too, so whatever you want to talk about, but where the vision of where you're going and, what kind of impact you want to make in the world.
Yeah, it's a difficult question because I've been going hard my whole life. Like I think it's Ed who talks about, you know, and I think my childhood and Ed's childhood were probably fairly similar.
Sounded like it. I
Um,
was wondering.
and and he talks about how for a good portion of our life we're running away from something. And at some point in our life, and Ed and I are about the same age too, I'm a little older than he is, you start running towards something instead of away from something. So I've been trying to figure that out over the last couple, 2 or 3 years. And a few things I'm working on. I'll work until I die. I know that, but I want to work on hopefully some more socially beneficial things. Um, I have a what do they call it? A transition plan where somebody's going to take over your company.
Yeah,
Um,
succession or something. Yeah.
yeah, succession plan. Um, we've got one of those in place that'll take place here in the next couple of years.
Oh, cool.
That's going really well. It's been planned out for a long time. And then I have a software company, mapping software, and that's a different type of business model. You're basically selling licenses and then it's recurring revenue. So all that investment has been made up front over the past bunch of years to get that software up and running. And now it's just a recurring revenue stream. But what I really want to do is help women in Mexico and Central and South America learn English, because that's the easiest way for them to make more money. So I've helped quite a few. There's almost a trial runs, different female friends of mine, help them learn English, pay for their classes so that just to see how that works out. And I've had 3 finish now, and they're all doing really well. One started her own company. The other one's still doing the classes, and kind of her English progress is a little slower. And then one is actually here in Colorado with me right now. And I've got a little studio apartment. She's staying there, and she is training with our team, and we're helping her develop skill sets that she can take back to Mexico and do really well with.
Wow.
So we're trying to help. I say me. I hope to have a team.
I always say we. I always say we. Everyone's like, who's we? I'm like, I don't know. You know my alter egos. I don't know.
Yeah. But there are some, this is not what happens is I had a girlfriend in Mexico City. She was Venezuelan for a long time. So I got to know a bunch of her friends and their friends' friends. And it's not uncommon for these girls. They want to go to school. They want to become engineers, attorneys, accountants, whatever. And it's not uncommon for them to have to go on dates on the weekends, and sell themselves to raise money for rent, for books, for tuition, for food, to help their mom, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And after that kind of sank in, it took a while for me to kind of figure out what was going on, because I'd ask my girlfriend, hey, is so-and-so coming over for dinner tonight? Oh, no, she's got a date, and it took me a while to figure out what was actually happening. Yeah, and then I would talk to them too, because we were all friends, and just trying to figure out how to engineer a solution to the problem. And so this is my best solution so far. And ultimately, I want to create a free online English course, like super comprehensive, that anybody could take for free if they wanted to put the work in and make more money.
Wow, that's so cool. I love that, man. I had no idea. So that's a cool mission. And if anyone's listening to this and you have some ideas, like I said, we'll have all Tim's information in the show notes. So if you have some ideas that maybe could help make this go faster, I'm sure Tim would be happy to chat. So I love that. I love sharing that. So in wrapping up, I always have 3 final questions, and then anything we didn't touch on that you think would be really impactful for our listeners. First and final question is, if someone's looking for their purpose, what's one sentence you could say that could help them find it?
Super cliche, but just go with your gut. Like, don't worry about what other people think. It's exhausting trying to please everybody.
True story. All right. Second question. What's a favorite quote and why?
Jesus, he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. Because I think we need to put other people before ourselves. Philippians.
Yeah, it's good. Third and final question. What's one word or sentence you want on your gravestone?
I always joke about this with my nieces and friends and stuff. I'm just like, just show up to my funeral and say nice things about me. So I don't know what would go on the gravestone.
Nice things.
I own the URL, lifeofperseverance.com. So maybe something to do. And my email address is Tim at life. Well, I shouldn't say that on this podcast, but anyway, persevering. Just don't give up, like all of us in Arete.
I love it. So super awesome.
Keep going.
Okay, so you run into someone in a coffee shop. They're like, Tim, that's amazing. I'm going to serve more people, get out of my funk, move on, all those different things. what is something we didn't touch on that you think would be really impactful for our listeners?
I think so. Two things come to mind. One is just like a finishing on the Mexico thing. One of the things that was super helpful that I didn't realize at the time, if you're going through a hard time and you can't get your mind under control, um, me going to Mexico City, knowing almost no Spanish, I didn't know anything about anything. I didn't even like YouTube it or anything. I just went. And it was great because your brain is all consumed with how do I even buy toilet paper? I don't know how to do anything. And so you're almost like a little baby, just trying to figure everything out. You can't talk to anybody. Um, you don't know how to deal in the currency. Like it's just a total overwhelming thing. And so I never thought about my divorce when I was there. I was just trying to figure out how am I going to
Survival.
eat? Yeah, where's the grocery store and things like that. So that was one thing. And then I think just always try to take the high road. Um, and I haven't always done that. But I always know when I'm not doing that, like I violate my conscience. And I can look back on my life, and this is really important to me. It always has been, even the way I handled the divorce. I could have handled it better, of course, but I always try to take the high road because I always knew someday I'm going to have to give an account for my behavior, my actions, whatever. And all of the things we do in secret eventually come to light anyway. So I always try to keep that in mind. I think that's really important, just as a general rule, to go through life and try not to do things you're gonna wish you hadn't done later.
That's a good one. I like that. Guys, make sure to rate, review, subscribe, share. Reach out to Tim if you have any questions. Like I said, we'll have his information in the show notes, how to access him, that kind of thing. Let's go out there. Let's change one life or one starfish at a time. If we can change one life at a time together, we can change the world. Thanks so much for being on,
Amen.
Tim.
Thank you, Angela. Have a great day.